This program has been made possible by the generous financial support of the Kaufman Foundation, DST Systems Incorporated, and the Community Foundation of Wyandotte County.
For the first century of its life, Kansas City, Kansas did much of the hard work for its bigger and better-known namesake across the river in Missouri, and did it well. The jobs attracted immigrants from Europe, migrants from Mexico in the South, and rural Americans looking for a better life. In the unpretentious words of KCK, these various peoples came together as a community.
We had the amenities. I mean, there weren't any wants that I saw. I mean, we had a thriving downtown area where we walked there all the time to go shopping. We had 3 movie theaters on Minnesota Avenue.
We used to go up to the Avenue Theater or the old Granada Theater or the old Electric Theater. We'll go to movies, and of course there was some restaurants up there at that time.
One thing nice about the community, it's very diverse. You know, the high school I went to was probably 60% white, 20% Hispanic, and 20% African American. So, you know, my good buddies were all racially mixed, and you know, we grew up in just a different kind of neighborhood, and it was great.
All the mothers got together once a week and had coffee together. Some of the families took vacations together. We had neighborhood bakery routes. We had all kinds of neighborhood tournaments and activities. It was just about as idyllic and perfect as you can imagine.
Everybody knew who you were. If you did something, your grandparents or somebody was going to find out about it. You know, we stayed out too late at night and ran around, did all the things we weren't supposed to do. And, you know, our houses were, you know, arm's length apart. So we literally could crawl from house to house. So I guess an urban childhood, but in a neighborhood, a real neighborhood.
The 60s and 70s were hard on Kansas City, Kansas, as they were on many cities. But here, the awkward sharing of power between city and county made a meaningful response almost impossible.
KCK always enjoyed a pretty healthy machine. Both Wyandotte County as a governmental unit, Kansas City, Kansas, there were an awful lot of people who owed their career success to involvement in one or the other of those governments.
You always had the courthouse on the west side of the street and the city hall on the east side of the street, and they weren't working together too well at all.
You know, I wouldn't open another factory across the street from my factory, you know, so why would we have 2 governments serving basically the same areas sitting across the street from each other?
And everything over there was politics, you know, connected to it. Even the person who was a street sweeper seemed to have been in a political job, you know, almost everything. You name it from top to bottom. It was almost, if you was working, had anything to do with the city, it had something to do with politics.
We had this attitude of the bureaucrats of sending us back and forth across the street, and we couldn't get anything done. Literally, you had to fight to get a street sign put up.
When you begin to see the community crumbling all around you, people moving, empty houses, and streets not being properly paved and that kind of thing, it kind of gets to you, you know.
We lost, I don't know how many folks out to Johnson County and probably Douglas County and Leavenworth counties. They just started, it was a mass exodus to other places.
It was a very, very deteriorating situation. We'd lost over 40,000 people. We were kind of in a free fall.
So as I would start traveling around, I'd start taking another look at my community. And then I started thinking about the numbers of my cousins. There were 11 in my mother's family, so I had a lot of cousins. And thinking of the numbers of cousins who still resided in Kansas City, Kansas, it was just a handful of us.
Everybody was leaving, the taxes were skyrocketing, and the valuations were plummeting. Every demographic that you could look at was bad.
people did not feel too good about the community and about themselves.
We were just floundering. I think our leadership for a lot of years, in my opinion, had tried to just push problems under the rug and act like they weren't there.
Everyone felt that the machine had been in for so long that there would be no way that anything new or change could come about.
You know, you don't embrace upsetting the apple cart when you're the guy driving the apple cart.
We felt sort of disenfranchised. We felt like that if you weren't a part of this select group, that you really didn't have a say.
As a business owner and as a resident, I was seeing the effects of rising taxes, the blight in our town, and it occurred to me that there's got to be some different way of doing this.
The situation grew sufficiently bleak that some citizens were prompted to speak out and others were willing to listen. Real change never does take place when the people are happy with their government.
I kept thinking about how they were organized, and again, that the city was 86% of the county or something I found at the time, and we have all of these like departments across the street from each other. We should be able to do something about it. So I wrote an article, editorial in the Kansas City, Kansas newspaper about forming a single county legislature.
The first thing I did was I made a speech at a civic organization that I knew would be covered by Bob Friskel, the reporter for the Kansas, and I knew I'd get a little press out of it.
Shortly after that, I read an article about a guy named Mike Jacoby, a retired military guy, was going around town talking about consolidating the city and county government. So I called him, and we decided, they aren't going to change themselves. They, being the city and county government, aren't going to change themselves. So maybe we can try to change them.
Kevin Kelly and Mike Jacoby are two of the most persistent, tenacious individuals I've ever met.
When I heard what Kevin Kelly was trying to do, I called him up and said we'd support the effort, because we all knew that not only changing the government to where to start working has to not be national and state, but also local level, and our government sure wasn't working.
I started hearing about it from friends within the community. A lot of it with, I talked to this guy named Mike Jacoby, and he's talking about consolidation, and you need to talk to him sometime. It makes some sense.
People said it can't get worse. Well, of course it can get worse. I've been to Jersey City, New Jersey. I've been to East St. Louis. I've been to communities that were in far worse shape, and we were headed that way. So what else are you going to do?
That started about a 4-year process of every day, going somewhere and speaking, making phone calls, going to community meetings, going to neighborhood meetings, doing research first, researching what was consolidation about and how could we, did it apply in our community.
I backed up Kevin Kelly and went with him any place he said he'd go, any place and anywhere, and speak about this issue.
We talked every morning on the phone, probably at 8 o'clock daily for a year and a half or so, I suppose.
I didn't have to worry about it. I wasn't going to be on my own in dealing with this process of consolidation, that he was a dependable friend.
And we formed a bond that to this day, I will die with that bond.
We'll just keep doing this until we can't do it anymore. And I don't know how long that might have been. We didn't have to find out. We only had to do it for about 5 years.
As Kevin and Mike quickly learned, citizen activists can only take change so far. They would need help from above, and lots of it.
It was at the state legislature, and we were trying to get a bill passed to create an opportunity for an election for a consolidated government in Kansas City, Kansas, Wyandotte County.
The machine was 100% against it, because they knew that if consolidation did pass, all of the office holders that were in and affected would be out and would have to run again. And this would give outsiders a chance to become part of the new government.
And we had been working with all the elected representatives from Wyandotte County and knew that we weren't going to have much support from our own delegation at the time. But I had a few of them that indicated they were going to help us.
They was holding on to it. This meant that bids was going to be opened up, and you weren't going to automatically get county and city contracts just because you knew the right people. It just was it was a frightening thing, and it was an economic thing for some people there.
And then when the day came to vote, and one of the representatives walked by me going in to take the vote, said, you know, I'm sorry, but sometimes you just have to do what you have to do, and walked in and voted no against us. And I thought, well, you know, if we can't get our own people to help us, how are we going to get the rest of the state to help us?
Coming out of there, you realize you got to have legislative approval, so you know you're dead for a year, because it's going to have to come back in session. You got to start all over again.
Somewhere along that time, I was writing my master's thesis on city-county consolidation in Wyandotte County and in the country. And what I knew was one of the things we had to have an elected official that, or a political candidate that would carry this forward.
A couple of guys on the street ain't going to convince anybody of anything. You've got to have an elected official, because people, in the end of the day, as much as we talk about politicians, at the end of the day, they're our leaders, and we turn to them.
So Mike and I developed this pledge to send to all the candidates concerning at least considering supporting the option for people to decide if they wanted consolidation or not in the community. And we sent it to all the candidates for mayor. And a lot of them we got back in 30 seconds. They just signed it and sent it back, you know. It took a while before we got it back from Carol.
Coming from an educational background, I always believed in doing your homework, and I started researching consolidation on my own.
She called around and talked to unified governments and city managers and mayors, and it took several weeks. But when she called back and she said, I'm on board, you know, call Kevin Kelly. We've got a white knight.
We would have to have the authority by the state to be able to place a consolidation issue on the ballot. So we spent a lot of time lobbying.
When she ran into brick walls, she just kept knocking them down. And she could have at any time said, well, you know, boys, we really, really tried hard. But she didn't. She stuck with it.
She had the moxie to step out front and become a lightning rod for that concept. And, you know, that was not a popular thing to do in many quarters. And she had the perseverance to make it work.
This largely Democratic county would need lots of help, not only from the business community and the media, but also from the Republicans who controlled the State House and Senate. Mayor Marinovich was not afraid to ask.
Mark Parkinson, who was then a senator from the Olathe area, chaired that committee. Mark called me at home and said, consolidation seems to make sense. I want to help you.
She got Mark Parkinson to create the resolution that broke the logjam. And I asked Mark Parkinson, Lieutenant Governor now, who's one of my all-time heroes also, because why did he step in? I asked him one time why he did that. I had thought maybe a friend of a friend had, you know, maybe recommended it to him. And he says, no, I didn't get a call from that fellow. It was totally Carol. You know, she just begged me. And I just got to the point where I couldn't tell her no.
The consolidation bill passed in March 1996. Republican Governor Bill Graves signed it into law and appointed a Consolidation Study Commission. The governor helped Mayor Marinovich thwart a last-minute effort by some Wyandotte County delegates to keep the commission's recommendations from going to the voters. That battle won, the leaders of the consolidation drive now had to win over the people who mattered most, their fellow citizens.
I I thought there was a great groundswell of grassroots support, but also felt that, it's change and people would be, when they voted yes, taking a risk because there's no guarantees. You can show what had happened in other communities, and we had a lot of great statistics on tax rates, et cetera, growth in other communities, and the benefits of consolidation. But what was formed for the campaign itself was the Citizens for Consolidation.
When the originators got together, they asked myself and Reverend Bacchus to be co-chairman of it.
Dr. Swanson is a fine gentleman and kind of soft-spoken, but very firm in his beliefs, and he was good to work with.
In a lot of ways, Reverend Bacchus was the most courageous person in this.
I kind of went against the grain, I admit, in my own community in standing for it. But I was confident, while it may not be the best thing for every community in this country, that it was a do or die situation for Kansas City, Kansas, and Wyandotte County.
They were the real soldiers, so to speak, in this campaign. They did all the speakers bureau, the yard signs, the door-to-door, the phone banks.
This is John Swanson, and I'm calling you about the consolidation proposal that's going to be on our ballot here April 1st. Now, I support consolidation because it will cut taxes in our community and will streamline our government.
I can't imagine the number of hours that people within the community put in on that campaign. It was pretty phenomenal.
Knowing that a prosperous Wyandotte County was critical to the health and prosperity of Metro Kansas City, business leaders from both sides of the state line contributed to the consolidation campaign. So did the media. Their help was essential. This machine was not going down easily.
Election day, those are tough days. It's like you start to second guess, should we have done this or should we have done that?
On election day, you're absolutely sure you're going to lose, and you start panicking.
That day, that morning, I was still putting signs out, believe it or not, up till about noon.
A lot of us were standing out on corners with signs saying, vote yes for consolidation.
What made it even more challenging was the day consolidation was on the ballot. Was the first time we met with representatives from International Speedway Corporation about a racetrack.
It was a pressure day, people was talking about it wasn't gonna make it, and we were hoping that it did make it. So we finally gathered at the headquarters there, somewhere around 47th and Parallel, and waited for the count to come in, but we was on the edge.
Hundreds of people were there. We were all kind of packed into this little office, it was a little storefront. And the early votes came in, and I thought, well, that this is going to get a lot closer.
We were cautiously optimistic.
We were praying for 51%, and ended up at 60.
12,580.
It was a good feeling after all that work.
I think we felt hope for the first time in a long time. So it was a very hopeful, euphoric feeling. I'll never forget that night.
Well, I was just simply overjoyed, to be personal.
Everybody was happy. I guess that's what I want to say. Everybody was tickled to death when we started. We knew we were winning.
We were ecstatic. You have to think there were a number of elected officials there that night, primarily from the city. We had strong support from a number of the members of the then city council. And I really have to give them really high marks because several of them were on the ballot that very same day being reelected. And they supported consolidation, knowing that if it passed and they were reelected, they'd have to immediately turn around and run for election again.
We depended on hundreds of volunteers to make this happen. and most of them were there in that little room that night. So it was really as strong a sense of community as I think I've ever felt.
I believe Kevin and Mike were simply motivated for the community. And I think opposition really had a hard time understanding that.
As Mike and Kevin had preached all along, everywhere the consolidation was implemented, it had proved successful. The consolidation of Kansas City, Kansas and Wyandotte County was no exception. Not at all.
All of a sudden, the whole metro and the whole state, I believe, looked at us differently. The perception of Wyandotte County changed overnight, and perception's reality in my mind. The perception changed. All of a sudden, we weren't the home of corrupt government and backroom politics. We were the home of a community that wanted to take back their government. We were the home of honest people who wanted to take control of their cities. So although we had a lot of work ahead of us, we could just feel the change almost immediately.
Unification is really about the unity of command and not to create a bigger government, but a smaller, more effective government. So you notice that we named our government the unified government, not the consolidated government.
We stopped dying. Wyandotte County stopped dying. Somewhere around the year 2000, somewhere a few years after consolidation, and began growing again. The numbers of people, the activities, the businesses, all the expansion. We quit dying and started living and started growing again.
Now, you can actually feel the pride among people. People aren't embarrassed to say they're from Wyandotte County, they've lived here all their lives, they're proud to be here. And people are coming back to our city, they're moving into our city again, they're bringing their business, which is quite obvious.
It gets maybe easier when you get the ball rolling. When people on the West Coast are talking about development in Wyandotte County, when Disney is talking about the possibility of coming to Wyandotte County, things get easier. You've got credibility.
We've now become a destination. Who would have thought 10 years ago that Kansas City, Kansas and Wyandotte County would be a destination attracting over 10 million visitors a year?
I think we're making great progress. I got a lot of confidence in the fact that we are going to be a community that will be competitive with all of the surrounding communities in Kansas City.
You know, there's still problems, and we're still an urban city, but it's certainly a very different urban city than it was 10 years ago.
Well, it's a proof positive that a couple of guys can make a difference in society.
I think what the consolidation of Kansas City, Kansas and Wyandotte County shows is what can happen when people in a community really care and elect to try to make a difference.
This program has been made possible by the generous financial support of the Kaufman Foundation, DST Systems Incorporated, and the Community Foundation of Wyandotte County.